You picked up a bowling ball last week, swung it as smooth as you could, and watched it roll dead straight into the gutter while the younger fellow 2 lanes over made his ball curve like it was on a string. You did nothing wrong. The ball did nothing right. And after chasing this question for the better part of 3 months, I can tell you the difference between a ball that hooks easy for someone our age and one that fights you the whole way has almost nothing to do with what you paid for it. Out of 10 balls I put through the same test, only 3 actually hooked easy for a slow arm and a soft wrist. The reason the other 7 failed got buried, because the one thing that matters most is too cheap for anyone to bother writing down for people bowling at our pace. By the end of this, I'll show you the exact adjustment, spelled out in the United States Bowling Congress equipment specifications, that costs about $5 and works on the ball already sitting in your closet. It works with your speed, your wrist, and your body right now, exactly as they are. I want to tell you where this started, because I was as skeptical as you are. I was standing in a dim little pro shop in a strip mall outside Toledo, holding a 14-pound ball the man behind the counter swore would turn the corner, and I rolled 6 frames straight as a ruler. Not one hook, not one. He shrugged and said my release was the problem. I drove home angry, and that anger is what turned into this whole investigation. Because the more I dug, the more I realized the man behind the counter had it backwards, and so did almost everyone I asked. Let me take you through it the way I found it, one clue at a time. The first thing everybody told me was weight. Buy the heaviest ball you can handle, they said. There's an old rule that gets passed around every bowling alley in the country, that your ball should weigh about 10% of your body weight, which lands most grown men on a 15 or 16-pound ball. That number has been repeated so many times people treat it like law. So I started there, because that's where the counter starts you. And here is the first crack in the story. That 10% rule was never written for people who bowl the way we bowl now. It came out of an era when bowlers were younger, threw harder, and generated their own hook with raw speed and a snapping wrist. When I actually timed my own throws against a slower, lighter ball, something strange happened. The lighter ball hooked more, not less. More? I couldn't understand it at first, so I went looking for why. A bowling ball hooks because of friction, the grip between the surface of the ball and the oil-coated wood or synthetic of the lane. Friction is what lets the ball grab and change direction. But there's an enemy of friction, and its name is speed. The faster a ball travels down the lane, the less time it spends grabbing, and the more it just skids across the oil like a stone skipping water. A slower ball spends more time in contact, digs in sooner, and turns the corner earlier. Now think about what a heavy ball does to an older arm. It forces you to heave it. You muscle it down the lane, and it flies fast and flat, skidding right over the oil and straight into the pins with no curve at all. That was me in Toledo. 14 pounds I could barely control, thrown hard just to get it moving, skating across the lane like it was on ice. So I dropped down. I tried a 12-pound ball, then even an 11, and for the first time in years, I watched a ball I threw actually bend toward the pocket. The lighter ball let me slow down, stay smooth, and give the friction time to work. That's the first thing the counter had backwards. For a senior with a slower arm, weight is not strength. Weight is often the very thing killing your hook. But weight alone didn't solve it, because 2 of the light balls I tried still went straight. So if it wasn't just the weight, something else was deciding whether a ball hooked or died. That question sent me looking at what these balls are actually made of, and that's where the real story starts to open up. The outside shell of a bowling ball is called the coverstock. It's the part that touches the lane, and it turns out that shell has a history most bowlers never learn. So I went digging through the record of how bowling balls were actually built over the last 100 years, and the timeline told me exactly why some balls can't hook no matter what you do. For the first half of the 20th century, balls were made of hard rubber. Then, Around 1959, a company called Columbia 300 introduced the first polyester ball, what most people just call a plastic ball. Plastic was cheap, durable, and it took a shiny finish. It became the standard house ball, the kind you grab off the rack at the alley with the chipped finger holes in the faded color. And here's the thing about plastic. It is smooth and hard, and it barely grips the lane at all. A plastic ball is practically built to go straight. That's why the free balls at the alley never hook. It's not you, it's the plastic. Then came a real turning point. In the early 1980s, right around 1981, urethane coverstocks arrived. Urethane is softer than plastic and it grabs the lane far better, so for the first time an average bowler could get a real, controllable hook without throwing like a professional. Urethane was the quiet revolution, and I'll come back to it, because it matters more for us than almost anything else I found. But the industry didn't stop there. Around 1991, a new material called reactive resin appeared, and it changed everything. Reactive resin is urethane, with additives that make the surface almost tacky at a microscopic level, full of tiny pores that soak into the oil and bite the lane. Reactive resin hooks hard. It hooks violently. The professionals loved it, and every ball company raced to make their reactive balls angrier and stronger year after year. So now you understand the three families. Plastic, which barely hooks. Urethane, which hooks smooth and controlled. And reactive resin, which hooks aggressively. And when I lined up my 10 test balls, I could already see the trap. 3 of them were plastic, and no slow-arm senior alive is going to make plastic hook. 4 of them were high-end reactive resin balls, the kind the shop pushes hardest, priced anywhere from $180 to $250. And that reactive resin, the expensive stuff, betrayed me on the lane. Here's why, and this is where I started to get genuinely irritated. Those strong reactive balls are designed for people who throw hard and spin the ball with a lot of hand action, what the sport calls a high rev rate. They need speed and revolutions to wake up. When someone like me, with a slow arm and a quiet wrist, rolls one of those $200 reactive monsters, it does almost nothing. It skids down the lane lazy and flat, saving all its hook for the very end, and by then it's too late and too little. I spent $200 to throw a ball that hooked less for me than a light urethane ball that cost a third as much. Sit with that for a second, because it's the moment the whole thing turned for me. The most expensive, most heavily marketed balls in that pro shop were the worst possible choice for the exact customer standing in front of the counter, which is to say, someone our age. And nobody tells you that. The signs, the displays, the fellow doing the selling, they all point you toward the strong reactive ball with the fancy core and the aggressive name, because that's the ball with the biggest markup and the shortest life before you're back buying another. That was the first time I let myself say it out loud. The bowling equipment business is not built to get an older bowler hooking the ball. It's built to keep you coming back to the counter. A reactive resin ball is porous, remember, full of tiny holes that soak up oil. Those pores clog. Within a season or two, the ball stops hooking, and instead of being told how to fix it, you're told it's dead and steered toward a replacement. I read bowler after bowler online describe throwing away balls that were perfectly good, balls that only needed a cleaning because the shop implied they were used up. So I had 2 of my 3 answers already forming. Go lighter than they tell you, and do not let anyone sell you the strongest reactive ball in the case. But that still left the biggest myth of all, the one the counter leans on hardest, and untangling it took me the longest. The word they use to close the sale is core. Every modern bowling ball has a weight block buried inside it, a shaped piece of dense material called the core, and the pro shops talk about cores the way jewelers talk about diamonds. They'll show you diagrams. They'll throw out numbers. A radius of gyration between 2.46 and 2.80 inches. a differential up to 6/100ths of an inch, symmetric cores, asymmetric cores. It sounds like rocket science, and it's meant to. It makes you feel that hooking a ball is a matter of engineering you could never understand, so you'd better just trust them and pay up. So I chased the core question all the way down, and I want to save you the months it took me. Here is the truth I finally found. The core does affect how a ball hooks. That part is real. But the core only expresses itself when the bowler gives it enough speed and enough revolutions to activate. For a hard-throwing young bowler with a big spinning release, the core matters a great deal. For a slow, smooth senior release, the fancy core is largely asleep. It barely gets a chance to do anything. Let me put a number on it, because this is the exhibit that changed my mind. When I looked into what actually controls ball reaction, the surface of the ball, the friction, accounts for the large majority of how it hooks, and the core accounts for a much smaller share, and that smaller share shrinks even further when your speed and spin are low. In other words, for you and me, the $200 core the salesman raved about is doing almost none of the work. We are paying for an engine we don't have the horsepower to turn on. And that pointed me straight at the thing nobody in that shop wanted to talk about, the one factor that does the heavy lifting for a slow bowler, the factor that's cheap to change and therefore worth nothing to sell. The surface, the texture of the shell itself. That's the real key to the whole case. And it's exactly the piece the industry glosses over, because you can adjust it yourself in your own kitchen for the price of a sandwich. And once you say a thing like that out loud, you start wanting the whole picture, not just the piece that fits inside one video. That is exactly why I sat down and wrote 3 short books for bowlers our age, because what I can hand you here is the surface truth, and there is a great deal more that took me months to pull together and test. In them, I walk you through reading what your ball is actually telling you, frame by frame, how to loosen a grip that swells your thumb and burns your shoulder. By game 3, how to sync your swing to your steps without rushing, and the 15-foot arrow system that closes the corner pin that has been mocking you for years. Same ball, same alley, same arm you already have, nothing to buy but a little sandpaper, and a 7-day money-back guarantee if it is not for you. If you want all of it, scan the QR code right there on your screen, link in the description, pinned comment, and the books are yours tonight. Now, back to the counter and the word they lean on hardest. I know some of you are listening to all this and thinking it doesn't apply to you. You're thinking your arm is too slow now, your grip too weak, your knees too stiff to bother with any of it, that hooking a ball is for people steadier and stronger than you've got left. So I went and found this next piece of evidence specifically for you, the bowler who's half convinced it's already too late, because what I'm about to show you needs no strength, no new ball, no trip to the shop, and not $1 spent on equipment. Here's what I learned about that shell surface, and it's the part that finally made my old ball hook. The surface of a bowling ball is measured in grit, the same word used for sandpaper. A shiny, polished ball has a very high grit, a slick finish that skids far down the lane before it grabs. A dull, sanded ball has a low grit, a rougher texture full of tiny scratches that bite the oil early and start hooking sooner. For a slow bowler who needs the ball to grab as early as possible, a duller surface is worth more than any core, any brand, and any $200. Now, most balls come from the factory polished, shiny, and smooth, because a shiny ball looks nicer on the shelf and sells better. But shiny is the enemy of the early hook we need. And here is the first thing you can do this week, at home, with nothing but items you likely already own. Take that green scrubbing pad from under your kitchen sink, the kind for scouring pots, a plain nylon scouring pad. With the ball resting in a towel on your lap, rub the surface of the ball in small circles, evenly, all the way around, for a few minutes until the shine dulls to a soft, even haze. That's it. You've just knocked the polish off and given the shell texture, and that texture grabs the lane sooner. When I did this to a plain, cheap ball that had been rolling straight for me, it started reading the lane a full arrow earlier and finished into the pocket with a real, visible turn. No new purchase. No stronger arm. Just a scouring pad and 5 minutes on the couch. But before you go scrubbing, there's a second free fix that matters just as much, and it's the one that quietly kills more hooks than anything else. Oil. Every time your ball rolls down the lane, it picks up the oil the alley lays down, and that oil soaks into the pores of the shell. As the ball absorbs oil, its surface gets slicker and slicker, and it hooks less and less. Bowlers feel their ball dying over a few games and assume the ball is wearing out. It isn't. It's just soaked. So here's the second thing you can do at home, for free, tonight. After you bowl, wipe your ball down with a clean microfiber towel before the oil sits and sinks in, and every so often, give it a deeper clean. Fill a bucket with warm water, not hot, add a little dish soap, and let the ball soak for 15 or 20 minutes with the finger holes taped over so no water gets inside. Wipe it dry. That warm, soapy soak pulls the oil back out of the pores and restores the grab the ball had when it was new. Bowlers who learn this get years more life out of a ball the shop would have called dead. I watched a man on a retirement bowling forum describe soaking a ball he'd nearly thrown away, and he said it hooked like the day he bought it. And he wrote, and this stuck with me, that he wished someone had told him 20 years and $400 ago. 20 years. $400. Because nobody told him a bucket of warm water was the fix. So now you have 3 free tools already. Go lighter than they tell you. Skip the strongest reactive ball. And keep your surface dull and clean instead of shiny and soaked. Every one of those works on the ball you own right now, with the body you have right now. But I promised you the finale, the single documented adjustment that broke this whole case open, and I need to take you to where I finally found it in writing, because this is the piece that pulls everything together. I'd been treating the scouring pad trick as a folk fix, something bowlers whispered about, until I went looking for whether it was actually official, actually documented, actually allowed, and it is. Right there in the United States, Bowling Congress Equipment Specifications, the governing rule book of the sport in this country, the surface of the ball is treated as a thing the bowler is expected to alter. The specifications describe measuring surface roughness and set the terms for how a ball's texture may be adjusted in grit using abrasive pads. It is not cheating. It is not a secret hack. It is a recognized, regulated part of how the ball is meant to be tuned to the bowler. The sport's own official manual assumes you will change your surface. The pro shop just never mentioned it, because a bowler who sands his own ball doesn't come back to buy a new one. And when I understood the specifications, I understood the finale, the single most powerful move a slow senior bowler can make, and here it is. You buy one abrasive sanding pad, the kind made for bowling balls, sold under names like Abralon or Air, in a grit around 500. One pad costs roughly $5 to $8. You take your existing ball, any decent urethane or entry-level reactive ball, and you dull the whole surface down to that 500 grit, evenly, by hand, exactly the way you dull it with the kitchen pad, but with a proper tool that gives you a consistent, controlled texture. At 500 grit, the ball grabs the lane early and hard, which is precisely what a slow arm and a quiet wrist need. That single $5 pad, used on a ball you already own, will do more for your hook than trading up to any $250 ball on the shelf. I proved it to myself on my own lane. I took the cheap urethane ball I'd nearly given up on, sanded it to 500 grit with one pad, slowed my arm down, and threw the best hooking shot of my life at 60-some years old. The ball left my hand slow and smooth, held its line down the boards, then read the friction and turned hard into the pocket. I stood there almost laughing, because it had been that simple the entire time, and I'd been sold every excuse but the real one. That's the whole case, and here's how it fits together, because it turns out the humble ball I'd been ignoring was the hero all along. The urethane ball, that quiet invention from around 1981, hooks smooth and controlled at low speed, exactly the way we throw. It doesn't need a big rev rate to wake up the way the expensive reactive balls do. It's usually cheaper. And when you dull its surface to that 5 to 100 grit the specifications describe, it hooks early and predictably for a slow arm better than nearly anything else on the market. The knowledge existed the whole time. It got buried under fancy cores and shiny finishes and $200 price tags, because a slow bowler with a $5 pad and a soaked-out urethane ball is a customer who stops spending. Somebody had to go dig it back out of the rule book, and now it's in your hands. So let me tell you which 3 of the 10 actually hooked easy for me. A slow-arm senior, and why. It wasn't the pricey reactive giants. It was the honest, simpler balls. An entry-level urethane ball, dulled to 500 grit, hooked the easiest and most controlled of everything I threw. A mild entry-level reactive ball, the kind marketed to beginners rather than professionals, and priced around $80 to $100, hooked well once I kept its surface dull and clean. And a light, symmetric core reactive ball at 11 or 12 pounds, again kept dull, gave me a smooth turn without demanding speed. I don't have 3 balls. All of them cheaper than the ones I was pushed toward. All of them made better by things I could do myself for a handful of dollars. The other 7 failed for reasons you now understand completely. The plastic house balls can't hook by design. The strong reactive balls need a hard throw and a big spin we don't produce, so they skid flat and lazy for us. And a couple of perfectly good balls failed, only because they were shiny from the factory and soaked with old oil. 2 things, a scouring pad and a bucket of warm water, would have fixed in an afternoon. I think about that man in the Toledo Pro Shop more than I should. He told me the problem was my release, and he sent me home with a heavy, shiny, expensive ball that was almost engineered to disappoint me. He wasn't lying, exactly. He just told me the story that kept me coming back, instead of the one that would have cost him a sale. The real story was cheaper, simpler, and sitting in the sport's own rulebook the whole time. Go lighter. Skip the strongest ball. Keep the surface dull and the pores clean. Dull and honest urethane ball to 500 grit with a $5 pad. That's the case. Closed. What I hope you feel right now is not just that you can hook a bowling ball again, though you can. What I hope you feel is that something was quietly taken from you. The plain truth about how a simple thing works, and that you just took it back. You are exactly the kind of person who suspected all along that the expensive answer wasn't the honest one, the kind who'd rather understand a thing and fix it yourself than be told to trust the fellow with his hand out. That instinct was right. It was right the whole time. Now I want to hear from you, and I mean this directly, so please do it. Somewhere out there is a bowler reading this who once threw away a ball a pro shop called dead, a ball that probably just needed a warm, soapy soak. If that was you, or if you were ever handed the 10% weight rule and told to buy heavy, tell me about it in the comments below. Type it out, even just a line. What ball did you give up on, and how much did it cost you? I read them, and other bowlers our age need to know they weren't the only ones. And if you want to keep pulling these buried, practical truths back into the light with me, come along, because this is what we do here, reopening the cases on the everyday things somebody decided we didn't need to understand anymore. I've already started digging into the next one, the truth about those slick bowling shoes they insist you rent or buy, and why the pair that actually helps your slide and protects your hip is not the pair they hand you at the counter. That one surprised me too. Stay with me, and let's go find it. Before you go, Let me tell you what's waiting if you stay with me. Inside the Wise Living Circle, I pick up right where this video left off. You can ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You belong here with us. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen. It takes a minute, and you can cancel any time with one click. Now that you've found the right ball, let's make it count. Next, I'll show you 3 simple footwork changes that steady your approach and bring you more strikes, without straining your knees. It's starting right here.